I'm so excited to do this video today because I get to introduce you to my very first book release. I've been publishing for quite a bit throughout my professional life, in newspaper articles and magazines, and of course my work as a ordained clergy and sermon writing and public speaking. But this is my first book publication, and I'll lift it up here so you can take a look at it. It's called Leadership at the Spiritual Edge: Emerging and Non-Western Concepts of Leadership and Spirituality, and the editors are there. This is a compiled anthology of different scholars and practitioners who are working in the field of embodied leadership, spiritual leadership, particularly from a non-Western perspective. And that's very much where I sit now, having left ordained ministry, having left Western Christianity, and now as a women-centered leadership coach and also gender and leadership scholar. It was such a wonderful opportunity to be invited to publish a chapter in this book because it really grounded this new professional focus that I have on the things that are most passionate in my own life, which is embodied expression, healing, trauma-informed recovery, women-centered approaches to leadership and life development, and in the case of my chapter here, really honoring the Indigenous roots of embodied social change. So my chapter is chapter 8 in this book, and it's entitled Activism, Performance, and Spiritual Ritual. So here's the cover page of that. And I'll just begin this short video reading the introduction to my chapter, some reflections on it as I share this with the world, and then a closing excerpt from the chapter. So here's how the chapter begins. In the bustling Andean community of Huánuco, Peru, enveloped by a ridge of majestic mountains and the rushing current of the Huánuco River, a huddled mass of no more than 50 people gathered by candlelight at dusk in the Plaza de Santo Domingo. The thin, wavering flames reflected off of the aluminum storefronts, now closed for the day, that surrounded the small courtyard. The decaying facade of a colonial church presided over the small gathering of people, who were at once prayerful and desperate. Those present had come to honor and mourn the children and families who had been affected by sexual violence in their community. The candlelight vigil was an act of remembrance and healing, just as it was a call for justice. There was a deeply spiritual quality to the gathering, a soul-level engagement felt through the unintelligible moans of despair and muffled prayers in both Spanish and Quechuan, in which Indigenous, Christian, and non-religious spiritual sensibilities intermingled in a common need for wholeness. That particular reflection was based on some journal reflection that I had done at the time when I was living and working in central Peru, working with a human rights organization that advocated for survivors of sexual abuse and domestic violence. I was there for a year. This is the town of Huánuco in the central Andes in central Peru. And it was very much a pivotal point in my life that really shaped my leadership moving forward and eventually led to my work as an ordained clergy. But my overall desire in presenting this work in book form is to really highlight the importance of these combined aspects of embodied social change, that it's not just on the policy end, it's not just through legislation, and it's also not just through personal, private, spiritual development and embodied awareness. It's the combination and integration of activism, performance, and spiritual ritual that I felt was so evident in the work that I did with this organization called Paz y Experanza, which means peace and hope. So I was really honored to be able to contribute to this book. I feel like it really is the bedrock of the work that I do now as a women-centered leadership coach, particularly as a trauma-informed and embodied and somatic-informed coach, as well as someone who engages in scholarly research and literature around embodied leadership and gender and leadership. I feel like the most important part of this book being released into the world is also the gratitude that I have toward the community in Huánuco who invited me into their work, invited me to share what I brought as someone who wanted to work with and for women, but also wanted to do so in a way that was very conscious of how my privilege and identity as a white foreigner coming into this context may be disruptive, may involve power dynamics that do not honor the local knowledge base and wisdom. But by coming into this context with an understanding of humility, an understanding of shared wisdom and knowledge, I was able to really defer to the local community to let me know where my gifts and abilities might be best utilized, instead of me coming in with a preconceived notion of any expertise, quote unquote expertise that I may have. So my work eventually ended up being as a dance therapist and movement therapy practitioner with the young survivors of sexual abuse, with an incredible support group called the Tamar Collective. This is a community of young women who have had a variety of different experiences on the spectrum of sexual abuse, including incest, including sexual slavery, rape, domestic abuse. And for me, going into that setting, not necessarily knowing the details of each of the women's experiences, my intent was to create a space of safety, of self-awareness, and an opportunity for the women to reclaim their sense of autonomy and agency in their own physical bodies, having been traumatized in various ways. So I find that embodied work with women is such an important piece in our own self-actualization, our own reconstituting of self after experiencing trauma, after experiencing abuse in its various forms. And I'm really grateful that this kind of a book is out there that can shed light on the ways in which this can be brought to sort of larger scale social change, that when we are aware of our bodies and where we end and other people begin, where we have a sense of agency and autonomy around our physical space and our personhood, particularly for women and other minoritized individuals, it can be a real game changer for how we can navigate in the world in a healthy way that promotes our own well-being. So I invite you to take a peek at this book. I will include the link to the book below. It's through Routledge Publishing. And I will close with just the closing paragraph of the book where I explain how this can be applied sort of more broadly in terms of social change. Rather than identify embodied expression as an ungrounded or unscientific, both academic and leadership sectors have an opportunity to recognize and embrace embodied epistemologies as a means through which we understand and reflect on the world around us. However, it is important that socially conscious leaders and communities who implement forms of embodied social change do so in ways that do not merely co-opt embodied practices that seem appealing, attractive, or trendy, without fully appreciating and understanding the vulnerabilities that exist when applying such practices. When incorporating elements of embodied social change through spiritual ritual, activism, and/or public performance, one must be extremely conscious of the ways in which spiritual leadership can intentionally and unintentionally promote abuse, revictimization, and manipulation of power dynamics. With a posture of humility and a deep awareness of the needs and vulnerabilities of the surrounding community, the practice of embodied social change can be developed and nurtured in all areas of life, whether in the streets, schools, clinical therapy, or collective worship, as well as in a variety of corporate and grassroots leadership spaces. As we find deeper awareness in and through our bodies within these various contexts, we have a greater ability to restore the broken aspects of ourselves, as well as heal the wounds within our communities. Well, thanks for listening and for celebrating with me as this book is shared with the world. I invite you to take a look at it, look at the table of contents. There were some incredible other chapters from some colleagues of mine, and I'm just really grateful to have been invited to participate in such a wonderful and very needed publication.